How's it going?
Hello. I'm Katie Room.
I'm David Room.
And today we're just gonna take it a little easy. Gonna go over some topics that you guys suggested on Twitter. I didn't have a chance to throw together my my slideshow with the news because my kids took a while to go down. But I do have a couple of things that I've linked in the description. The first is a Kickstarter that is wrapping up this week by C.S. Johnson, an author that we've reviewed on Periapsis Press. And it's a special 10-year anniversary hardcover edition of the Starlight Chronicles. Excuse me. Those aren't the ones that I reviewed. I reviewed the Divine Space Pirates, the first book in that trilogy. So I haven't read these yet, but she's an author that we've reviewed before. So definitely check that out. And another thing that has happened since our last stream is TJ Marquis launched his new book, Bloodbane. So that's in the link is in the description as well. And then the last thing is a free novelette. It's a short, quick read by Kalina Radcliffe, who wrote Mouse, which I reviewed. So that is pretty fun and exciting. She's doing it as a part of a sci-fi promo. So yeah, I don't have slides to go with that, but now I've hit all of those, and they are in the description. So I hope you guys check them out.
You're doxing us.
I am?
With your shirt.
Oh, yes. Yes. Now everyone knows where we live. Excuse me. I figure it's fine. I mean, our PO boxes.
I suppose.
So I'll just pull up on my phone the tweets.
I can pull it up on my computer here too.
Sounds good. Had some fun suggestions. So, and you guys feel free to ask stuff or tell us if you have any or things you'd like to hear about.
Can you tell we're both tired?
Oh, in the chat.
Thanks for coming tonight, everybody. And we'll try to focus on questions that people who are actually here in the comments right now asked for sure. So okay. So I think I don't think TJ's here, but he didn't have anything useful to add. So
he said that he had the twins were still up. So
his original reply to the tweet was he's trying to think, but
anything. Is Patrick in the chat?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, because I think his was the first comment on here, or very close to it. It was the first one I saw. And he had 3. He crammed 3 into a single tweet. He said, interpretations. Can I get better at not reading into a story themes or messages the author didn't mean? Is the first one. I think that going back to some of the things that we said in our discussion about theme. And I think that one's titled Messages in Fiction. I forget which episode it was. As a reader, you're bringing things to the story. I think that the only time that it really that it would be something that you don't like, you would want to take away something. I guess I don't see this as a problem, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because if you come away from a story with an interpretation that the author didn't intend, that's a failing on the author's part, is kind of what we had said.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're just like a catastrophically bad reader.
Right.
Right. Just somebody who actually wants to put their own meaning in.
Yes. As opposed to, like we see a lot in
like modern
film critics especially, where the journalist is inserting their own usually a problem. They're inserting their own problem.
I was gonna say obviously someone not like Patrick.
Right.
When we're I guess we're assuming that, you know, you as the reader are somebody that's trying to, you're at least trying to find what the author means.
You're approaching the story in good faith.
Yep.
I thought you weren't supposed to insult the reader.
Yeah, that's what I was responding to. I mean, yeah. I think it's just like anything else. Going back to the original question, it would be just practicing looking for what's there and not there in the text. You know, maybe if you come up with some interpretation of it, trying to find evidence against your interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe what would be reasons that my interpretation isn't correct, to try to keep yourself open to other things that the author might be saying. That might be a concrete thing that you could do to try to not read into it.
Yeah. I think practicing actually finding themes too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are examining a story, or not even examining, but just reading, and you are wondering about what the theme is, if you have practice identifying threads and like repetition of ideas and stuff like that, you're more likely to come to, I guess, like a stronger conclusion than someone who has less practice doing that. And I say that because a lot of people just read for enjoyment and aren't really thinking about themes, and so they don't engage with that actively.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe doing a little bit of research about the author's background and maybe a high level what some of their thinking or philosophy is. Like if you want to try to discover it for yourself without being told ahead of time, you could kind of look for a summary of maybe what the author's personal beliefs are.
Yeah.
And then you could make sure that you're not coming up with something way off base. Like if you know the author is an anarchist, right? Their story probably isn't advocating for some other form of government. So you would kind of know to discount certain things.
Sure. Yep. Like when I did my review for the first Drosselmeyer book, I wrote much more confidently and probably used a bit stronger language to talk about the ideas that I thought that the story communicated, because I was more familiar with what the author thought, because I had seen him on the Anarchist Bible Study, and I had a rough idea of the positions that he was coming from. Normally, I try not to say things like the author intended this theme so much as this is the theme that I identified, to leave room for that, because you can come away from a story based from your own experiences with a vastly different idea of what the story says, especially if the author was not being quite as intentional with the theme as someone like Paul Thompson, who was very intentional.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's go on to Patrick's.
Oh, the second one?
Next question.
My phone reset. I have to find it again.
Okay, so his next question was, does the author have to, quote unquote, believe in the world they created for the story to be good? And yeah, I guess my knee-jerk reaction would be yes, because you're trying, I think good art kind of communicates something genuine. So if you're creating something, it should be coming from and trying to represent something that you actually believe or is meaningful to you in some way. And obviously, in the process of writing a story or creating something, you can make up a lot of incidental details that aren't all necessarily laden with meaning. But at least like for the core theme, and I would put the world of a story specifically as like being pretty important to the theme and like what the story is. Yeah, it seems like you'd have to believe in that somehow for it to be good, at least on a thematic level. Obviously, I think it could function if you didn't believe it. You could be a ghostwriter. Somebody could give you a synopsis or just a general, like, I want this to be a fantasy story, and you could, or they could give you a bunch of lore. You could be like a ghostwriter or somebody who's writing within an existing world, and it could still be a functional story. But I think ideally it would come from someplace kind of deep within you.
Yes. I guess I don't have too much to say about that because I'm really more of a reader myself.
Yeah.
His third question is, isn't a hero who's not all paragon more accurately reflect reality of people?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of, I think, is going back to our heroes and villains discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the issue isn't portraying heroes as flawed and relatable so much as it is like celebrating, I guess, those flaws, or making excuses for them. Or maybe he's talking about Flat Arc versus...
Yeah, so Draco in the chat raises a good point, which is he says, screw reflecting reality. Who needs a book for that? And I was going to bring up something like this. So I sort of agree. I agree with that on one level, because I would say the purpose of writing a book, especially a fiction book, is not necessarily to be real. I feel like that's kind of another modern criticism kind of thing. Like, in the most extreme example, it's like the the representation matters thing, where
Mm-hmm.
you have to, you know, have this diverse cast of characters to represent people, because I think who is it? I think Critical Drinker, he always like repeats the to more accurately reflect the world that we live in today, right? So that's the sort of extreme case of that. On the other hand, I would argue that a good reason to make your characters have flaws is because real people have flaws. And I think if you want characters that people identify with, especially, so again, not every character has to be a character that people identify with, but if you want characters that are sort of sympathetic, sympathetic versus like being paragons or heroes or
Mm-hmm.
things, like flaws are important. And I don't mean flaws that make them terrible people, but flaws that you can sympathize with because maybe you experience something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And flaws that are eventually overcome, because that's the arc.
Yeah.
They shouldn't just stay having that same flaw.
Mm-hmm. I think that in order for a character to be sympathetic, they need to be real in not necessarily flaws, but in other characteristics. I think that other characteristics are more important than flaws. And I just thinking about a show that I was watching a while ago. I watch like foreign historical dramas. So right before they kill off a character, right, they make him super sympathetic by emphasizing his place in the family, right? Like, he's a son, he's a father, he's a husband. Those things that are immediately we identify with those immediately because we all have relationships with people like that. So I think there are other characteristics that are more important than flaws in order to make a character sympathetic and relatable. I mean, not necessarily sympathetic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say flaws aren't the only way to do that, but they are one way to do it.
Okay. I guess I'm just saying that I think that
you're arguing that there are better ways
Yeah.
to do it, and I am agreeing that there are other ways. I don't know if I would say that there are better ways, so I might disagree with you there. But
yeah,
it's like, to contrast the extreme view that like a character has to be flawed to be relatable or whatever. Like, we're not saying that.
right. Yeah. I guess the reason that I say that there are other better ways is because I see the potential of the reader withdrawing from a character over a flaw. Even if it's not like a moral failing, there's also like the cringe element that a reader might retract.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
Right.
You gotta be careful with flaws for sure.
Yeah.
This gets into the whole likability conversation.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on to Draco Knights?
Yeah. once we're done with his Twitter questions, he asked a real specific question in the chat.
Okay, awesome. My phone's doing that thing where every time I put it down, it resets to the Twitter home.
Yeah, Twitter's been doing some weird stuff lately for me too. Like I'll be scrolling and tweets will just disappear out of the feed. Like I'll scroll past something like, oh, I want to go back to it, and it just like that individual tweet just disappears out. It's super annoying.
Okay, so Draco Knight. Did he do 2? He must have. They just separated here for some reason. Because I've got one that starts could also do. Well, we'll start with that one. Could also do an idea on technology, considering.
Oh, his first one was maybe a discussion on villains. Oh, yeah, that's right. And we responded and pointed it back to the original villain conversation.
Oh, yeah. I had recently, and I replied with this, I had recently seen a really interesting tweet by, everybody's got spooky in their title now.
Spooky Narnian.
Oh, is that who it is? No.
Oh, Spooky Ponces.
I don't even know how he came up on my feed because I don't think I follow him.
No.
Oh, he retweeted me. That's what it was.
Okay. Oh yeah, I saw this.
Yeah. And he said, and this is about villains. He said that he thought that one of the reasons that villains were popular is because we've made good and doing good look too easy. And doing wrong, doing evil as difficult. And so the heroic traits of perseverance and
willpower,
defiance. Courage, those things, instead of being displayed in the hero, end up being displayed in the villain, because the villain is the one who is working hard and the good guy is taking the easy route. And I thought that was interesting. I hadn't heard that before, so I thought that was kind of a.
I was gonna say I would make a counterpoint on why people like villains, but I think it's actually somewhat aligned with it, which is that people like villains just because they're actually cooler than the heroes.
Sure.
So this is something that comes up a lot in discussion about Star Wars. Everybody likes the Empire because they're cool. They have cool ships, maybe even cooler ships than the rebels. They look cool. The Nazis have cool technology. Like it's
the Nazis are always doing cool supernatural weird stuff.
Yeah. There's a tendency to make villains cool, and the part of that goes along with this is that the sort of positive traits like willpower and kind of come with the villains too often being like a big cool organization. So if you don't fantasize about being a rebel, but fantasize about, and this is like all Star Wars, but this applies to a lot of different stuff. If you don't fantasize about being a rebel, but you want to be part of this cool organization, that could make villains appealing too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so his second question was we could discuss technology. Technological themes and stories like Man versus Machine, or how to make AI villains compelling. I don't know if you guys know, David actually works in software development in AI.
Yep.
So, and AI in this situation actually stands for artificial intelligence.
Yeah. It's not a joke. I mean, I work in my day job on stuff that is AI, specifically machine learning. And some people like to debate about whether machine learning is AI or whatever, but like that's what it's called nowadays. So Patrick says, how close are we to Skynet Trader? I think we're a really long way off from AI doing dangerous stuff myself, but I think it's actually super useful. But yeah, so there's a lot of questions in Draco's tweet, but we'll try to get to him. So technological themes and stories like man versus machine and how to make AI villains compelling. So maybe just something that I'll say about this is, I don't want to like dismiss this question, but for me, I don't actually find AI villains compelling. So I think and man versus machine stories I don't necessarily find super compelling either. And I think this could just be a case of like about how things actually work. So I have a hard time suspending my disbelief. But I think maybe some ideas about how to make that stuff compelling would be, you can always have human servants of an AI. Maybe playing up a sort of cosmic horror aspect of it, where the AI itself is impersonal, so that's sort of maybe not scary on its face, but if you make the impersonality of it creepy, it's not like a human. It thinks in a crazy way, so it's unknowable. I have a villain like that, and well, it's not a villain. It's more of a cosmic horror type entity like that in my stories, and that's kind of how I'm dealing with it. Is it's it isn't personal, so you have to make the non-personness of it compelling. Maybe another thing that you could do that might be compelling would be if the AI is like actually based on a real person, you could get into that real person's backstory and stuff like that. I don't know if that's kind of a trope too, is like, somebody's consciousness is turned into an AI or something. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, learning more about who that real person was, I think could be really interesting. So a couple ideas there. I think how to use computer science terms and stories is obviously a really big question. And it would be interesting to think about that question and like do a longer episode. Because like I think if I thought about it, I could probably come up with some of my pet peeves and different things that I see people do wrong. I think one thing that I'll just mention one thing that I see a lot is people like to use the word algorithm to mean something that it doesn't. So they'll often use algorithm as just kind of like a magic word, or they'll have it mean a lot of different things. They'll call a program an algorithm, or they'll call something that's very obviously not they'll call like a password an algorithm or something like that. So algorithm, I think, is a word that people like and is overused. And all an algorithm is in real life is a set of steps that it's like a set of steps that you follow to solve a problem, and it's very abstract. So that's one that you might want to watch and be careful with how you're using, because I think it's really overused. I mean, like just off the top of my head, I could name like a half dozen movies that use that term in a weird way. So that's something to watch. And honestly, like if you want to use computer science terms, just look up the Wikipedia articles about them and read it, and you'll probably find some new interesting ideas that you didn't have before from what the things really mean.
Yeah.
Should we so Draco asked a really specific
Yeah, go
question
for
in the
it.
chat. Let's see if I can find it. He said, if cyberspace could be used for FTL travel, would spaceships use browsers or routers? So that's a really interesting analogy. I think probably routers would be like the mechanism. Routers are like sort of like portals that like communication happens through. So routers would be like a mechanism outside the ship that could facilitate travel. I'm imagining like the mass relay gates in Mass Effect, or wormholes or something like that. And maybe the spaceships would be more like browsers in this analogy, where a browser is like a computer program that, and networking is not my area of expertise here, but a browser is a computer program that handles communication between your computer and another computer on the internet using a very specific set of protocols to bring information mainly from the other computer to yours, but also send some back. So a browser is also something that's kind of facilitating communication at a higher level. So I think maybe a browser would be more like a ship in the analogy, cool. And a router would be more like a gate or something.
I also see this comment here. Do we want to talk about this?
Oh, yeah.
So, Jeffrey Rankin mentioned that we could talk about the Christmas book.
We should probably just talk about it pretty high level, because a lot of stuff isn't settled yet. But
yeah, so right now we're in the process of putting together a sci-fi fantasy Christmas anthology from using collecting short stories from authors that we've reviewed on Periapsis Press, and we're working on formatting and putting together the algorithm to make paperbacks, so that we can have a paperback release at the same time. Mm-hmm. We're working on doing some cover art ourselves, and then of course I'll be editing and writing a nice forward and stuff for it, mm-hmm. as well. So yeah.
So I talk about it on Twitter some, but I have my own set of tools, software that I wrote for publishing, and it currently does ebooks. But a couple years ago, before I set writing aside for a while, I was working on print formatting stuff. So I've gotten that back out, and there are a bunch of qualities of print formatting of an anthology that I wasn't doing because, I was just... The great thing about writing your own software, right, is you can get it to do the thing that you want it to do and nothing more. So I was mainly just focusing on the feature set that I would need for publishing my book. So with the anthology, you have a different author for each chapter. Something that I found when I was doing the typesetting experiments for my book was that most fiction books actually don't have table of contents. Some do. It's not an unnecessarily super duper rare thing, but most of them don't. So I was ignoring table of contents functionality. So there's a few things that have to be done to just get it to work with the anthology, where you have different author per chapter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're really excited. gonna try and jump over the bar, which, as David always says, is low. So
yeah, I think the bar is low. This certainly isn't going to be a perfect thing, right? It's going to be our first attempt at doing this, but I think we can put out something nice.
Yeah.
Patrick made a comment about doing AI cover art, and I'm going to try not to use super strong language here, but I really do not like AI art for a lot of different reasons. With respect to my friends who are doing cool things with it, I don't think you're terrible people.
Right.
It's just not for me. But yeah, I'm going to try to do the cover art. So Katie had a really cool idea for cover art for a scene, and I'm going to try to do it using my 3D art tools that I've been developing. So that might go really well, or it might go really poorly. We'll find out. But I think at the end of the day, I think it'll be nice, and it'll be something that, unlike AI art, which the longer you look at it, the less sense it makes. It'll be a cover art that the longer you look at it, the more sense it makes. So
that's the goal anyway.
Yep.
So yeah. Keep it. Let's see.
Some more topic requests are coming in on Twitter too.
Ooh.
Yeah, Draco, if you want to just, feel free to DM me anytime if you have questions about stuff. I'm on Discord too. I don't know if you're in any of the chats, like the Pulprev group chat or John Delarosa's channel or anything like that. But either Twitter DMs or there, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat about terms and give you my opinion. And I mean, I'll just say too, I think, you don't need to necessarily satisfy experts with your usage, right? Not everybody's an expert and you can use terms and talk about things in your story without being an expert, and it's fine. So, but I'd be happy to talk with you about specific stuff if you have questions.
So, there's one about marketing strategies, and I can talk about it briefly from like a reader's perspective.
Yeah,
try and keep from becoming a writing advice stream, because I am trying to press brand pretty reader focused, as a place that sort of indie authors and readers can meet and discover each other. And I think that people who are readers but not writers will probably tune out. But from a reader's perspective, and I think Fiona Wolf tends to agree with me on this, it's like X and X type of marketing is not necessarily super useful, because it doesn't communicate what about X does your story share. If I am not familiar with one or both of the things that you reference, it's inaccessible to me. So I would recommend doing something more direct, which is, I guess, what I try to do in my intros to my reviews. I try to hit genre, and then I try to get at a couple of things that are in the book that kind of get at the feel of the story, or are things that people will latch onto and say, oh, this is a book I want to read. For example, The Governess of Greenmere, I, in my intro, specifically mention that there's a good dog, because I know that there are readers who like stories that have dogs in them. So that's something that I put right in my little 2 sentence intro, so that a reader can quickly identify there's an element that I appreciate and enjoy and look for in stories in this one. Even though the dog doesn't play an enormous role in the actual plot of the story, it is an element that is important to certain readers.
Yeah, I think in general, just being able to be clear about your story's genre and what readers will find in it is really important. I think, especially in indie fiction, because, and this is one of the strengths of indie fiction, in my opinion, because there's a lot of stories that are kind of passion projects that don't fit into boxes. It can be hard to sort of talk about what genre something is, or find analogies. And I think everybody thinks that their story is unique, but there are actually a lot of unique stories in indie fiction, so that sometimes can be hard to describe.
Yeah.
But I think that's just the most fundamental aspect of marketing your book, is being able to describe it, compare it to other things, and talk about specific things in it that a reader would like. And that's a challenge, because as a writer, you don't, kind of going back to the discussion last week, it's a holistic thing. You don't want to take it apart. You want people to experience it as a whole. But I think you have to be able to do it. You have to be willing to do that to market.
I'm going to pull Fiona Wolf's comment here as an example. The Firefly X Star Wars. Far more useful.
So basically Firefly.
far more useful to me as a reader would be saying it's a space western.
Yeah.
Or what's the other? Like space opera.
Yeah.
Or like, depending on the tone.
Actual genre.
Yep. And then saying, like, what I would put in my thing would be like, say it was dark. So I'd say like a dark space opera or space western, depending on how it felt to me. And then featuring like proton swords, or however they call it, like, phaser swords, to sort of capture that element that people are looking for when they say that they like Star Wars, and they are wanting to see elements from Star Wars in other stories, to sort of break down into pieces that what it is that people are looking for. That way you get a fast, as opposed to Star Wars, which has been so diluted, especially recently, with conflicting quality, I guess.
Yeah, and even genre.
Yeah, that too.
I think modern Star Wars, like Disney Wars, really is more confused tonally in genre than
Yeah.
the original stuff was.
Yep.
So it gets harder to describe, right? Like how would you describe the genre, or how would you describe The Last Jedi? I never
Mhm.
saw Rise of Skywalker yet to this day, but like how would you describe The Last Jedi to somebody without naming any specific characters and without saying it was Star Wars? It's kind of hard to describe.
Yeah.
Where I think the original trilogy is a lot easier to describe.
Mhm.
I mean, they all kind of are. And the special thing about Star Wars is it is a little bit of a genre mashup, but it's like it goes too far in Disney Wars.
Yeah. Whoops. So Spooky Narnian actually just commented sea monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned last stream, I think, that I find like space, like not space, sea, like seafaring stories just very, very well, it's just not as compelling as other stuff. I think because there's not a lot of room for things. Now I'm losing
Wow.
track of what
I'm curious to hear where you're going to go with this.
I just feel because I got distracted thinking about the whether or not this applied to space, like spaceships and stuff.
You're going to come up with a criticism of sea stories that just ends up being a criticism of my books.
And I don't think it does apply to your books because a lot of I like stuff that happens in multiple settings, like across.
Yeah.
So I feel like stories where the setting is confined are less compelling to me, and that's to me as a reader and my preference. It's not a criticism of those kinds of stories, and I think the reason is that the tension has to be largely provided by internal or interpersonal conflict, and that's just not. I like fighting sea monsters and stuff like that. So yeah.
What does that have to do with sea monsters other than the fighting sea monsters? Any general opinions about sea monsters as a topic?
I recently compared Tradpub to now the name's escaping me. The sea monster that sucks everything up and then spews it all back out again from Greek mythology. There's two monsters in a distance.
Charybdis?
Yes.
I don't know which one is which. I didn't know that it spit them back out. I thought it was just like a big whirlpool that just.
Yep. So it sucks everything up and then it spits back out because not Odysseus, but somebody else managed to survive by holding onto a branch while it sucked down his raft and then spit the raft back up, and he was able to escape. I don't remember which story that is, but
Anarchist Bible Studies asking about sea monsters in poetry. Like, I guess Tennyson has a Kraken
Oh,
poem. I've never read that. I think the only like sea poem that I'm familiar with is Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is really awesome, but there isn't really a sea monster.
yeah.
There's like the Pirates of the Caribbean style ghosts in it. But I can't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I know of
Mm-hmm.
the Kraken, but I'm not familiar with Tennyson's. I guess so. I unfortunately have less experience with poetry.
Yeah. And I don't honestly, as about the topic of sea monsters in general, I don't have a lot of experience with this either.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've even really read a book that was like a supernatural sea monster story. I guess um, William Jeffrey Rankin mentioned some good stories by William Hope Hodgson. I guess H.P. Lovecraft has a couple of good sea monster stories. Call of Cthulhu is kind of a sea monster story in some ways, I would say.
Oh, sure.
The Cthulhu is very much like a sea monster in appearance, and then, you know, the context in that story of how they find him and the events surrounding that are specifically, you know, sort of sea monstery, or and have to do with just, you know, boats and stuff. Another and a couple other Lovecraft stories. Dagon is a short sea monster story that's pretty cool. It's really short. It's like just a few pages long. A guy kind of finds if I remember right, it's like a spot where the water has withdrawn. It's like an island or something that was like evidently underwater, and he sees this like ancient city, and then the sea monster is chasing him and like appearing outside his window. Yeah, it's nice. And then of course, Shadow over Innsmouth,
Yeah.
is a great story where
Patrick mentioned the
where
weird
the
fish monsters.
yeah, where the main character, well, spoiler alert, the main character
returns to the sea.
Yeah, he returns to the deep. So so it's kind of, you know, sea monsters not in a nautical setting like they're being battled from a boat, but
right.
but the sea monster lore and you know, it's kind of, you know, what if sea monsters came up on land and lived among us secretly, type story.
Yeah. Very and that's that sort of cosmic horror element where it's usually, I feel like when people talk about cosmic horror, there's sort of this idea that there's like these giant monsters sort of out there.
Mm-hmm.
But with Lovecraft, they're very much like embedded here. So
Yeah.
and the ocean as kind of the last unexplored frontier of Earth,
Mm-hmm.
kind of supplies them.
Yeah. Jonathan Sugar mentioned Shape of Water as a sea monster story. That's that Del Toro movie, I think, about sort of a merman type creature.
Okay.
I haven't seen that. I'd really like to. I almost feel like that's something kind of like Shadow over Innsmouth, where you have these sort of misunderstood creatures. I like to read Shadow over Innsmouth, the ending being happy, not creepy or sad. Yeah. Chick falls in love with and sleeps with the merman. So probably my interpretation of Shadow over Innsmouth is kind of like a sort of sympathetic monster or sympathetic merman or type character like Shape of Water.
Yeah, I guess I don't read it that way.
Yeah,
so.
happy for the protagonist, weird for the reader.
Yeah.
William Jeffrey Rankin says. Yeah, I think part of why I don't have a huge problem with the ending of Shadow over Innsmouth is I feel like enough work is done in the story to show that the fish people's culture has beauty and redeeming value to it, and they're out of place living on land. So you could kind of maybe excuse some of the sketchiness of the stuff they do as like they're just out of their element. And if they could go back, right? If they could go back to the deep, then that's where they could be their real selves and be good. Right? That's kind of how I read it. You know, like in the story, a lot of it is dealing with that is it a necklace or a tiara that belonged to the character's grandmother, and it's like just an immensely beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Which stands in real contrast to the sort of horrid inbred fish people who live in Innsmouth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, it's almost like the people, like the fish people who live on land are like, and the weird stuff they do, like they're like the cult. I forget if the Cult of Dagon is in that book or not. But there's similar ideas in other Lovecraft stories. It's like all that weird stuff is kind of, it's like it's corrupted and maybe they're misunderstanding things. And, you know, once the sort of return to the deep is kind of an eschatological thing that is going to make things right. Yeah, it's a tiara.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
From Draco about technology and magic.
Yeah. Do you like the idea of technology being treated or confused for magic? Or do you and readers prefer a clear line of demarcation? And he follows up with, I see a lot of potential in the idea of magic from technology, but I don't see it a lot in the indie book scene.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Yeah. I don't like the tendency to, and this is probably just a personal preference, I don't like the tendency to explain away magic with technology. Like casting the like a primitive culture, or like historical people, or just, or even like the main characters of the story as people who are explaining an unknown phenomena by saying it's magic, and then sort of coming in and saying, well, that supernatural element is actually has a technological explanation for it. And I think the reason that that trend has to do with the denial of the supernatural as a as a valid explanation for things. I think that the explaining away of sort of the wonders of our world with scientific explanations in it's too bad that you can't just have that pleasure in wonder and excitement and discovery. Not saying that knowing how, say, the Northern Lights work, it detracts from that, but the treatment of
it's like the atmosphere is a giant TV screen.
but the treatment of it as like worthy of wonder because we know why or how.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that same sort of trend in as using technology to explain away a supernatural, something that you initially take as a supernatural thing. I do like Magitech quite a bit. I think that's fun.
Where you combine technology and magic somehow.
Yeah. I like steampunk for that reason. So you get some of that. I bought from Half Price Books a third book in the series. I didn't even know. I just grabbed it off the shelf. Agatha H. is the series by
oh yeah, that's the one that's by that that guy and his wife who did a bunch of illustrations for Magic the Gathering.
Foglio?
Yeah, Phil and Kaya Foglio.
Yeah, or something like that. And that the main character is and it takes place in a steampunky world, although they called it like a, I don't know, something grittier, like diesel or something.
So not steam.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but like it's like, you know, it is that same sort of overly
it's
machine.
Like machine, yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the main character can build these crazy machines that do, you know, overpowered fun things. So I enjoy that kind of combination. I don't have a problem with steampunk. I know some people in our indie scene do. I don't know why.
So I've got some stuff to say about this. So there is,
I'll put this back up.
I think kind of extremes you can take here. So one extreme that's sort of, I think, rightly criticized is the idea where you sort of explain your magic system so well that it basically is just technology. There's like a very coherent set of rules to how it operates and everything is very well understood. So some people say, okay, if you do that, then it's not magic anymore. It's just technology.
Sure.
So that's, I would say that's kind of a criticism that a lot of the pulp rev people make about stories, especially stories like Harry Potter. And they'll say things like magic should be full of wonder and it shouldn't be explained. You know, they don't want hard magic. They want soft magic. I think they would probably think of the magic in Lord of the Rings as good magic, you know, where Gandalf kind of does these things, but it's not clear what he's able to do or not able to do. So I think that's valid in a sense, but at the same time, if you're going to make a story or wielding magic, I think for the story to be effective, you need to be able to understand what tools the protagonists have and what they don't. So if magic is just totally unexplainable, then it would be hard to have the reader be invested in what's going on or kind of understand what's at stake or what the protagonists are able to do. So something that I think works well is where you have magic and there's sort of a subset of it that works well or is well understood, and then there's other parts of it that aren't well understood. And then maybe part of the story is discovering how those parts that aren't well understood work.
Yeah.
And I think Harry Potter works like this, and Harry Potter does a pretty good job of it. So there are things that like everybody knows characters and they're done pretty consistently, but then there are more mysterious things that they're discovering. So when it comes back to the original question of combining, what was this question about? Technology being treated or confused for magic. You'd want to sort of keep that, and he says, like, I see a lot of potential in the idea of magic from technology. You'd want to keep that problem. I would say magic from technology would mean that there is going to be a very clear set of rules for how things work, right? Like technology is like real, and there's rules that explain how it works. So if magic was coming from technology, it would be the same thing. So you'd have to keep in mind that idea that there could be things that maybe would be well known, well understood, and there might be things that aren't well understood. I think there should still be rules for everything, even if they're not explained.
I think that's the key, is even if they're not explained. TJ Marquis' Heroes Metal books. I don't want to give anything away, but the mechanism by which the world exists with these sort of layers has sort of a technological and that being revealed changes some of the reader expectations for how things work. There's greater expectations of consistency. So even if it's not explained how things work or why they do, the reader is expecting them to work in a particular pattern.
And just sort of another thing too, I think a response to people who would say, oh, if the magic has rules, then it's just not magic. I think you could make a kind of genre argument that just if it looks like magic, it is magic.
Sure.
And if it looks like technology, it is technology, regardless of how it actually works under the hood. You know, like if people are waving wands around and like shooting fireballs or, you know, there's like spirits doing things, or, you know, you have like traditional fantasy weapons. It's like, it doesn't really matter if it's technology. It's going to feel like fantasy.
Yep, I agree.
So I think a lot of what sort of makes it magic or technology just comes down to how it looks.
Yeah.
You know, like you wouldn't say, if you have some lit RPG, for example, that is actually explicitly set inside a virtual world, right? You wouldn't say, oh, that's science fiction. Like if it's set in a fantasy world that's like inside a computer, you wouldn't say, oh, that's science fiction. It's like, it might have science fiction elements, but if the main story is taking place in this fantasy world, it's fantasy, right? Would you generally agree with that?
Now I'm trying to think about isekai, which has lit RPG elements.
Yeah. But like the first season of Sword Art Online,
Mhm.
I wouldn't call that sci-fi. I would call that fantasy. Fantasy with sci-fi elements.
Yeah. There's certainly episodes that are more about like the world outside of Sword Art Online, and those deal with sort of the larger like sci-fi themes of the capabilities of the technology and the morality of killing people in games, that kind of stuff. But the magic is, it's gamified, but you still accept it as magic because it looks like magic. And there is an understanding that even though the game exists as a program with parameters, things outside of that can occur.
Yeah, that's a good point for that story specifically.
Yeah.
Fiona Wolf mentioned how, not every book needs a Sanderson level explanation, but Sanderson kind of made that style of story popular.
Patrick said that he needs to understand the rules and limits, or at least have the general parameters.
And then he asked about stories where characters confuse tech for magic, like the Mole People. I'm not familiar with that story.
Yeah, I'm not either. I think that goes back to my preference about not really liking that kind of thing. And maybe it has to do with what you said, where I feel like it's like a switch where my genre was fantasy, and then, oh, just kidding, it's not, right? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of a gotcha.
Yeah.
And I think this is just more evidence to what I was saying about, like, if it looks like magic, it is.
Yeah.
So then you kind of feel like you feel a little bit cheated if it's revealed later, oh, haha, this wasn't actually magic, it was technology. But maybe if it was introduced in a way where what it was made clear earlier, it could be kind of this cool hybrid where you had this, oh, this is like a combination of magic and technology, that's cool, or it looks like magic but it's actually technology, and that's cool,
Yeah. Or if you made it, reader figured it out.
Yeah.
Before the characters or before the mechanism of the story required it. Like I don't like short story endings that are like,
the twist ending.
Yeah, haha, the things you believed in were not real. It was a computer all along. Like that's and again, that's my preference. I don't know that I want to say that is across the board what everybody likes from their stories. But I'm gonna pull this up again, unless you
the questions.
Yeah.
There's a couple more that we haven't talked about yet.
It was the algorithm all along.
Oh no.
Oh, Fiona Wolf points out Jiao Tu's Endeavor. the characters react to tech like it is magic. And that's a good point. There's the feel that because the characters don't fully understand how the technology works, that there's kind of a mystical element. But I think this kind of applies to that same sort of thing as Sword Art Online, where you think that things outside the system could potentially occur, like with the ghost, where there might be a technological explanation or there might be a supernatural explanation, and that the leaving that question open is interesting and gets the reader thinking about it. Let me see. Io Cap said, weirdest book you've ever read.
Mm-hmm.
That was just after we started the stream.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of weird ones. The problem is that until I started keeping a log of the stuff that I read,
Mm-hmm.
I read so much that I couldn't tell you titles or authors. I could only tell you bits that like I could remember. Do you have one that comes to mind right away?
I'm just trying to think. Usually if I start reading something and it's just too weird, I don't finish it.
Yeah.
Probably the weirdest book that I like a lot, I actually like, is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. That's the sequel to Ender's Game. And it's probably not super weird in the sense of like there are a lot weirder sci-fi books out there, but it is pretty out there, and it's a good book, but it's unfilmable. So if you want to read a book that is just, a good story that just would not work as a movie, I think that's a good book. Let's see here.
I think, a book that I think is weird is Maze Runner. That one I just do not understand. And I feel like you have to read the whole series, but I just can't get through it.
Well, I don't know. It seems like typical. I mean, we saw the movie.
Yeah.
That's typical YA kind of.
Yeah.
You're in a game kind of stuff.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. Like it's just a Hunger Games kind of thing. Mystery.
I think it's bizarre. Hunger Games suffers from the same sort of like why question. Like, why would you let this happen? Why would adults allow this? But with the Maze Runner, you feel like the adults are doing something extremely intentional. But I just have not finished the series because it's been too I just don't.
There's one other book I was going to mention. Let's see here if I can find it.
One of the reasons that I think that I never finished the series is because the setting changes. Because they escape at the end of the first book. And and the setting was what was compelling for me to read the first one.
Yeah. Okay, so another weird but good book. I haven't actually finished this, but I would recommend it based on what I've read. is this book called Rosita and the Beautiful Game. I don't know if I've talked to you about this at all.
Mm-mm.
It's by Loretta Maliki. She's an author who's in our circles on Twitter. She has a few books that have been in Hans's 99-cent sale.
Okay.
Like she's got a book called The Gentleman Farmers that I think is pretty popular.
Yeah, I recognize all those covers.
Yeah. So I grabbed Rosita and the Beautiful Game because I like romance, and I wanted to read some romance because not a lot of pulp rev type books have romance, and it took me a little while to figure out this book because it's written in this kind of weird stream of consciousness style, and it is a sort of urban fantasy book, but it is very, like, the urban fantasy elements are very light and just played totally straight with no explanation. Interesting in that way. Like the characters just acknowledge that there's vampires in the world and lichens, and everybody knows about it. And that stuff is just randomly dropped in with the sort of stream of consciousness about like the main character. The main character is this kind of terrible law student, and like all these crazy supernatural details are just sort of mentioned offhand, along with really random stuff about, you know, like her experience going to the store and like judging the cashier and stuff like that.
So is she a terrible person or is she a terrible student?
She's like a terrible person.
Okay.
She's very judgmental, looks down on people, has terrible friends, and yeah, it's a very interesting book. Very hard to describe using the kinds of terms that we, or the frameworks that we use to talk about stuff on the show. But the setting is really neat because the supernatural parts of it, because there's like a vampire and a werewolf, are the way it's handled is very interesting, in just sort of an offhand way.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like if you were just reading some book that, you know, you didn't know had any fantastical elements at all, and then just randomly in the middle of the story there is like a werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that it was supposed to be supernatural, and then I was like reading it and there didn't seem to be anything, but then the elements kind of start coming in different ways. It's very interesting.
Oh, my notebook's right here. As far as indie stuff, in Corona-chan, that the anthology that did David Stewart put that one together?
Yep.
J. Manfred
Whiteshell.
Yeah.
Whiteshell. I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
He does some.
You should read his stuff.
Yeah.
If you want weird stuff.
Yes. He has some weird short stories in that.
Yeah.
Weird on purpose, like weird sort of not like weird fiction, but like,
well, kind of
bizarre,
kind of weird fiction.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, J. Manfred Whiteshell is how I would call it. Whiteshell.
That's probably yeah.
And I read one of his books too, or Whiteshell or something. Yeah, he has a book called, I think it's actually out of print now, called Expedition to
yeah.
Eden. So you can't get the Kindle version anymore, but I really enjoyed that book. He writes these stories that are kind of like if you crossed um, fairy tales and urban legends with some religious elements, but also like sexploitation. Escape from Eden was a really interesting read because it was sort of tonally all over the place, but was really entertaining and had all these goofy characters and it was just not what I was expecting it to be at all. But it was very compelling and and just just entertaining in its weirdness and just the classic like uh just kind of apotheosis of something that a traditional publisher would not touch with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
But isn't but is like but is good and entertaining in its own way, right? It's not like it's not unreadable or unpolished. Like he had something specific that he was doing.
Yeah.
It's just very weird.
It's very intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has 2 short
Unconventional,
stories.
I would say, even.
Yes. He has 2 short stories in Corona-chan, and they turned me off.
It's not definitely
it's
not Katie's
my thing.
Speed.
But they both ended well. Like he didn't just like create this weird feeling and then drop me, right? Like with like short stories, a lot of the times they push you into feeling uncomfortable and then they sort of end. And usually the ending is awful, worse than the uncomfortable feeling. But both of his short stories ended well, in my opinion, where the main character had like the best possible ending, right? Like not, I don't know if I would say happy endings, but like not horrible endings.
Yep.
But they were
they pretty graphic?
Yeah, and a little bit raunchy. It wasn't my thing. Going Native in particular.
Oh yeah.
Give me the heebie-jeebies.
Going Native was published in Kursova.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that one copy of Kursova that I have has
Okay.
that one in it. Yeah, but good stuff.
Yeah,
I think if what we're talking about, if it at all sounds appealing to you, you should buy his books.
Yeah.
That's what you're gonna get. I haven't read any more of them, just because that's also not something it's not quite my speed. But it's he continues to write them, and he has great covers too. So very like kind of exploitative, like, okay, talking about book marketing, I think he's got a good handle on what makes a good cover. Oh nice, he's got a collection that has Going Native that's got an actual illustration.
Oh,
that's
nice.
Great. Yeah.
Corona-chan would probably be a good way to test out whether or not he's something that you would be interested in, because I think it's still free.
Yep.
And that one is just chock full of good stories. Every single one was good.
Yeah. Or just grab one of the issues of Kursova that he's got a story in.
Yes. yeah, the story, I should say, the stories in Chrono-Chan are good. The presentation is a little thrown together because they did it pretty fast, but was there anything else?
Yeah. Did you see Jeffrey Johnson left a comment? He said post-apocalyptic science fantasy.
Post-apocalyptic mouse.
Okay.
Probably would count.
Any just general thoughts about post-apocalyptic science fantasy?
Science fantasy.
I think I know what he's talking about here, so I'm gonna talk about it a little bit, but I just want to see what you have to say first.
Okay. I think generally, like, I prefer well removed from the apocalypse, so very post and stuff being built up, cultures and societies and stuff kind of in the farther removed and less like dealing with the aftermath, if that makes sense for me.
Yeah.
So I like Mouse because it has that sort of feel that there once was this more technologically advanced civilization, and there's still a lot of technology in it, but it's like quite a bit of time has passed. I think Gideon Ira is kind of like that. Those aren't for sale anymore, unfortunately. But that the direct cause of the apocalypse is no longer in play as either as a power or as a fallout. I kind of like that. I like the apocalypse as a mechanism by which the setting was created, and not so much as a active part of the plot, if that makes sense.
I think it usually is, right? Post-apocalyptic
right,
stuff usually is, because it's like whatever technological force caused that, usually nuclear war or something, isn't there anymore.
Right. And I guess I would say I feel less driven to read stories that take place in kind of like a desolate, absence of culture, or like isolated cultures. Like, I'm not, like, if you tell me something's like Mad Max, I'm not compelled to read that, or like Book of Eli. I'm like, I'm kind of indifferent to that kind of setting, if that makes sense.
Yep. So one story that we talked about in the other show that falls into this would be Mordor and Kyrus in the White City.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Kind of a Mad Max-ish type setting. I would call it fantasy, though, given just the other stuff going on, right? If it looks like fantasy, it's fantasy.
Like we say,
and then I think another, maybe the quintessential science fantasy example that a lot of people talk about, and I don't know, maybe Jeffrey wasn't thinking about this. He was maybe thinking about some other stories that I'm not so familiar with, but is Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe.
Ah.
You know, I'm not sure if I'd call that post-apocalyptic, because I think, again, the apocalypse was quite a long time before the events of the story, if there was one. But it is set in sort of a setting where there's like this kind of decaying remnants of a much more technologically advanced civilization.
Okay.
And then it's sort of like a fantasy setting in there. So there's a lot of like things that are very obviously tech that are mentioned offhand or sort of treated as magical objects.
Sure.
But there's also a lot of like actual magical stuff in that story, or in those books, as far as I can tell. That's actually a pretty good example of a weird book. I tried reading that a couple times, and it was a hard do not finish for me, just because of some of the stuff it got into that I just personally don't like. I have a lot of respect for the story, and I've read a lot about it, but it's just not something that I'm really interested in reading for some different reasons. But it's a really cool setting. I would love to read stories that are in that setting that are just about other things than what the books are actually about.
Fiona Wolf had a couple of suggestions.
Yep.
Book of Basque and Gemini of the Sleeping Gods, which
Yep.
she says is post apocalyptic space / science fantasy. And Patrick points out sci-fi aliens did it, fantasy a wizard did it, post-apocalyptic radiation did it.
Yeah. Patrick mentions how Mad Max 1 didn't even feel post-apocalyptic. Yeah, I mean, Mad Max 1 isn't really post-apocalyptic. It's like society is in extreme decline. That is a really, really good movie. So I hadn't seen Mad Max 1 until maybe a couple years ago. Mad Max 2, Road Warrior, is like one of my favorite movies, but I hadn't seen the first one. Mad Max 2 definitely has that a post-apocalyptic feel where everybody's in the desert. I don't know if
that's the one that
I don't know if there really was like an actual apocalyptic event, or if it's just kind of society just steadily went downhill to the point where there's no fuel left, and it's, I mean, it takes place in the Australian desert, where it's already a desert in my understanding. But yeah, I mean, it's a good example of that kind of setting.
I just remember I didn't like Mad Max 1. And I think I quit halfway through.
It's not a uplifting story at all. It's pretty I mean, you find out basically why it's his origin story. So it's how he becomes Mad Max. And I thought in that movie that, so like, I knew that his family was going to get killed. I was under the impression that it happens right away, but it's like the whole movie is building up to it happening. It's very, very tense. Yeah, Patrick crying emoji. Yeah, it's a very rough movie, but it's really good. And the setting especially stands out, because it's like this interesting setting where it's society is recognizable, but it's much worse, and it's kind of like, it's not futuristic, so it's not sci-fi. It's not like a sci-fi cyberpunk dystopia. It's like, what if it was that present day, like in the 1980s or whatever, but just everything was worse.
Yeah.
There's a few movies that I can think of that have these kind of interesting, weird settings like that. Another one that is Streets of Fire. It takes place in this kind of weird mishmash of 1980 and 1950, and it's like a very dysfunctional society, but it kind of resembles ours, but not at the same time. It's very, very interesting stuff.
Doug Wise mentioned Jack Vance.
Yeah.
And The Dying Earth.
Yep. I've not read those, but I've heard really good things about them. I think Adam Furman has been reading those and tweeting about it.
Yeah. I think I saw something about that. Yeah. Patrick mentions BioShock.
Yeah, that's now we're just kind of getting into like weird society, like weird alternate
it's like
society.
Not quite sci-fi. It's
yeah,
kind of like not alternate history, but like alternate
present. Yeah. And definitely science fantasy, right? I would say BioShock is a great example of science fantasy, sort of magic and technology being combined in weird ways, kind of setting. Yeah, really good setting, really good world building. At least in the first game. BioShock Infinite was bad, and I would not recommend that. It's worth reading about, but probably not. I think probably my biggest disappointment with that game is that I was expecting the setting to be more important in it, and it just like do interesting things, and it just didn't. It was just an excuse to kill a bunch of people, and I didn't like that.
I think we've done everything on the Twitter thread.
Yeah.
Did I miss anybody's question in the chat? Let me know. Whenever I pause to go back through the chat, there's always hilarious stuff that I missed. So I'm sitting here chuckling to myself. Maybe I'll go back up to the top. Whoa. Okay, we've done enough that my...
Your StreamYard is struggling.
I don't think we missed anything.
Nice. Patrick's making Abe Lincoln assassination jokes.
Which is what we need. Oh, Patrick says that we didn't mention Lord of the Rings even once, so we should probably say something.
Post-apocalyptic science fantasy. Sea monsters.
Are there sea monsters? Oh, yes. It's a lake monster, technically. But
yep.
There we go.
Oh, and we did too mention Lord of the Rings, because we mentioned it as an example that people would cite of soft magic.
Ah, yes.
Like Gandalf's Gandalf's magic not really being explained. You don't really know what he can and can't do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it then.
Yeah. Well, this was a fun discussion. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming, and I'd always like to hear more ideas of topics you want to discuss and things on Twitter or in the comments here.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of fun, and we can come up with stuff to talk about, but we would like, since you guys are so supportive and participate in the chat, so make sure that we talk about stuff that you guys are also interested in.
Yeah, and it's a nice way to have longer conversations. I think on Twitter a lot of times everything gets clipped really short. People trying to make not you guys, but a lot of people just try to make gotcha tweets and things, and it's nice to even with the chat just to be able to have longer conversations about the ins and outs of things. So it's a good time. Yeah.
And be sure to check out the links that I left in the description to support some indies and what they're doing right now. And check out periapsispress.com.
Yep.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Catch you later.